Hey everybody, it's Carm here, coming to you on a late Wednesday morning. Felt like coming on and doing a response video to someone who I'm really glad to see is back on doing videos, Shannon. She goes under the name Shannon D now, and when I first came across her videos, it was Light Breeze 55, which was quite some time before I even started making videos. She's been one of my favorite people ever since I came across the VC in particular, but also videos in general, where someone would just sit and just show what they were interested in. So yeah, really glad. Hey Shannon, really glad you're back. You see this. She did a video, her second to most recent video was talking about, very loud truck going by, was talking about, titled it Growing into Music, talking about her own evolution as a music lover and listener, and kind of throughout the years, you know, how it changed and evolved. What was she into initially, early on, that she wasn't into later? What changed? What didn't change? And she was focusing on one particular artist who she's into now that she wouldn't have never seen herself being into when she was much younger. And she's someone who our tastes are quite different, but I think the passion is the same. And I think a lot of people out there, you know, who do these videos, the passion's very much the same. I found that at the age of 14 was a very important year for, she was pointing out for herself and for me also. That was a year that I got into so many different things, and it really accelerated quickly after that. I know I've mentioned this show many times, probably too many for some, Musical Star Streams, show that I've been taping off the radio. I first came across it, I think it was around the tail end of '89, when I was in 8th grade, at the age of 14, and I'd never heard anything like it. The variety of music on the show, a lot of keyboard-based instrumentals, but there was ethnic music, a little bit of modern classical, and even some pop stuff that was a little more, you know, the kind of things that might be on the B-sides, you know, primarily instrumental. But it kind of really led me into so much else that I'd gotten into over the years, and to this day I'm still into. You know, artists like Vangelis, you know, still an all-time favorite. One of my favorite classical pieces of music, Gustav Holst, The Planets. I heard this. In fact, got this from my uncle at the age of 14. We were up in Michigan together. You know, Mannheim Steamroller, a group that I think I got into when I was about 15. Of course, this particular artist, Ray Lynch, heard him very early on, probably from that very show. Hey Yanni, yeah, I still have a thing for Yanni's music. It's especially of this period, you know, in the private music years, it still stayed with me. And of course, the beloved Tangerine Dream. You know, I got into them at the age of 15, and that's never wavered. Let's see, Russ Freeman, Nocturnal Playground, went on to do the Rippingtons. Of course, Pat Metheny. Now another one here that's one particular thing that I know Shannon and I share taste-wise. My old beat-up copy here, Genesis Live. This is an album I'll have to go into on its own at some point. You know, there's a story behind it, and it really opened up a lot of channels as far as listening. And even at the time when I first heard this, at that age, I wasn't even aware that Peter had been in Genesis. I knew his solo music, and I knew later Genesis, but wasn't aware of this. But yeah, I'll go more in depth into this at some point. Now, through the years, at that point, you know, entering high school, you know, I began getting more into, you know, things like what's known as smooth jazz, and then fusion, then gradually into more mainstream traditional jazz, and then it led me into areas which I never thought I would have gotten into, like more free-form jazz, you know, Art Ensemble of Chicago, and a lot of the stuff out of Europe, where at times they were straying from an easily discernible melody that you could follow, and even like a steady rhythm, into something that was more, definitely required more of a concentrated listen to, to get into what they were doing. But also then throughout my 20s, Shannon was pointing out there was a point where she would just explore as much as possible, whatever genre, whether it was familiar or not. And I found I was doing that to a degree, in the same way. I'd find world music albums, stuff from Africa, Asia, Indian music, which I got into very much. Other forms of classical music, just whatever seemed unusual, and just whatever would catch one's fancy. I remember taking a couple of courses in school, this world music survey and kind of general music appreciation, just whatever it took to find new avenues. But I also found later on that I would get into stuff like choral music as I got more into my late 20s and early 30s, stuff I would have never seen myself getting into. Being that for some, I guess there's a lot of reasons I've been more drawn to instrumental music in general. But, with choral music, a lot of times you have examples of the voice being used as an instrument on its own, and blending with the way it blends with other voices. But also like singer-songwriter stuff that I wouldn't have thought I would have gotten into, began getting into a little bit, during my 30s, early to mid 30s. Someone like Joan Armatrading, which again, back in high school in my 20s, I wouldn't have thought I would have gotten into stuff where they were, with a few exceptions, things that they were actually singing about something, and telling the story that way. Another more recent example, Amy Cohen, Glass Laughs Back. Very interesting, just being compared to everyone from Charles Ives to Kate Bush. I could actually hear someone like Julie Tippett's in her delivery here. But this sort of thing, again, like the singer-songwriter, just telling your story with words, whereas I'd always been more into telling the story through the music itself, and evoking imagery rather than more overtly stating it. But of course, music with lyrics, if you know where to look and listen, there is a lot that that could paint just as much of an evocative picture. And it took me a long time to really realize that, but again, that's part of the evolution. And some other music I would have never thought I would have gotten into way back when was Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. Eventually came to collect a lot of their stuff. I think when I was about 34, 35. There's the parallel there with jazz, of course, but they went into all kinds of other directions with all the songs they covered. But it's still a lot of fun. And things like, this is Mort Garson's more known for his synthesizer stuff, of course. The early Moog experiments, but stuff like 101 strings or the Mellocrino strings, the kind of easy listening stuff, which at the time I would have thought was more like old person music or the stuff that would be in your grandparents' collection. I came to appreciate this stuff a lot more in recent years, in the last 5 years. A lot of it has to do with the VC too, of course, things that were shown there. But just another example of an avenue that you can't predict at the time, but you just never know where these things will take you. A couple more. There's another thing I learned through the VC. Someone like David Greenberger, great storyteller. A great album too, by the way. Michael Dill had turned me onto this. Another example of the sense of narrative, how it could come in so many different forms and come through so many different pathways. And another vocal artist who I think kind of bridged the gap between the stuff that I was getting into when I was 14 and the later singer-songwriter stuff that I came to appreciate a little bit more. Claire Hamill, Voices, a beautiful album. I would recommend this highly. Old Starstream's favorite. And yeah, it's just it is a really fascinating journey. I know I want to do I've been thinking about it for a while, doing kind of a roots video, which will probably be quite long because I want to get a bunch of stuff that I've had over the years, from the early years, and just kind of go more in depth into them. And you know, that'll probably be a video that maybe only 2 or 3 people will watch, so it'll probably be pretty long. I'm just gonna let it go. But yeah, Shannon, as her example, she was citing Frank Sinatra as being someone who she wasn't really particularly into early on, but came to really appreciate later. It was really neat. She showed a binder that she had in high school. It was really nicely done, where it was like artist profiles and essays that she wrote on individual artists and did reviews. It made me wish I had done something like that back then. Actually, when I was right towards the end of high school, I drew pictures of my favorite artists and put them up on my wall in kind of like a triangular, like a pyramid formation. You know, Steve Roach and Harold Budd and Brian Eno, I think, and you know, people that I was really getting into at that point and still into. That was my contribution to that sort of thing, I guess. But yeah, I just wanted to come on real quick and respond to this. And, you know, I don't know if Shannon had intended that to be a thread, but it just touched off a lot of thoughts of my own, and I wanted to do it as kind of a way of sort of honoring her, you know, just you know, welcoming her back. So, and yeah, and I'd highly recommend all of you, if you're not familiar with Shannon's channel, please check it out. She has a wonderful way of very eloquent, fun, and you know, good-natured way of, you know, just expressing her thoughts and feelings on music. And you know, whether or not it's your taste, you could still find a great deal there, a great deal of sympathy there, and common ground, just as far as the passion and the interest that we have. And again, I think we all understand that, you know, kind of charting the evolution of our musical interests, and you know, never being quite sure where it'll take you next, and you know, just staying open to it, you know, even while you know, staying with the core tastes, just you know, keeping the channel open, as they say. So yeah, hope we're all well, and yeah, and definitely check out our channel. I think you'll really enjoy it. So, well, until next time, peace, love, and joy.